For 40 years, we have been lied to about women and men, about domestic violence, about sexual assault, about privilege, about rights, even about the very idea of equality. Erin Pizzey, who founded the world's first internationally recognized battered women's shelter, has known all along that something's wrong, because she witnessed the change herself back in the early 1970s. Today, she talks to many younger men and women who have been hurt by hateful and dishonest gender ideology, and she has a question for them. When did you wake up? And how long have you been awake? And of course, what should we do about it now? Welcome to When Did You Wake Up with Erin Pizzey and her co-host, Dean Esme. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the November 8th, 2014 edition of When Did You Wake Up with Erin Pizzey. I, as usual, am Erin's co-host, Dean Esme. How you doing this afternoon / evening, Erin?
It's a cold, wet, miserable day. And
in other words, you're in London.
And London with our cup of tea and ready to go. Looking forward to it.
Excellent. Okay, today, Erin, our guest is Laurie A. Couture. Mm-hmm. We published a fabulous essay by her that had been censored rather brutally by another publication out there, a feminist publication, called An Autistic Critique of Feminism. A humanitarian on the autism spectrum refuses to be silenced about the overlooked side of social justice, which was censored, and then we republished on A Voice for Men. Did you get a chance to read that?
No, I haven't, but I've talked. Laurie and I've talked, so we know we know a lot about each other.
Excellent. And this whole thing came to our attention when she made a terrific video called Feminist Media Censorship Puts Public Safety at Risk, which we also posted on A Voice for Men. And it's what generated the call out because she had written this terrific article. And it was a critique of feminism and somehow, and showed how feminism can do damage in areas of abuse and that sort of thing. And they left it all in except everything about feminism. So we wound up getting the original from her and going ahead and publishing it. And she made a video about that experience. Yeah. I rather expect that feminist publication is a little annoyed. You'll find that all on A Voice for Men for anybody who's listening. So Laurie, anyway, that was a long-winded introduction. Are you there with us?
Yes, I am. Hi, how you doing, Dean and Erin?
Fine, thank you.
Great.
And Laurie, the name of your website, or do you have more than one? What is the Laurie A?
Well, the name of my website is laurieacouture.com. I am the author of Instead of Medicating and Punishing, and you can learn about all that as well as some of my blog posts on laurieacouture.com.
And that's Couture for anybody who's curious. I'm also going to make sure there's a link on that in the show notes with A Voice for Men. So great to have you with us here today, Laurie. Now, what we normally do is we ask you the big question, which is when did you wake up? But I first had some questions that I wanted to delve into, or an issue I wanted to delve into, because just before showtime, Erin, you asked me what was going on with the White Ribbon campaign, or the whiteribbon.org, I mean.
Yeah.
Now, for those of you who don't remember, there has existed for a few years now a charity group in Canada. Laurie, we seem to have an echo coming from you. Is there any way you could move your mic except when you're talking? Or turn your volume down a bit or something?
See, I just lost the call and came back on. How's that? Is that any better?
I think it's better. Somebody's also typing very loudly. Is that you, James? Okay, sorry, listeners.
Nope, I'm muted as always.
Okay. Somebody was typing very loudly. That may have been you as well, Laurie.
Yeah, I think I was tapping the volume.
Oh, okay, no problem. So, anyway, for our listeners, we have for years there has some years now there has existed a charitable group in Canada and Australia, and they're trying to go international, calling themselves the White Ribbon Campaign. And unfortunately, if you go to this group's website, you will find it is filled with false, phony, bogus, one-sided statistics about men's violence towards women. And the same old pseudoscientific lies that we've debunked time and time again on A Voice for Men, that has been and here on the show with Erin, that Erin's entire life has run in the face of. So eventually, a very nice Canadian gentleman donated to us a website called whiteribbon.org. We started our own whiteribbon.org, and it has lots of info on it. Have you seen that? You have seen the site, haven't you, Laurie?
I sure have, yeah. And in fact, I was aware of the old White Ribbon Campaign, and that was one of the ones that I have written to a couple of years ago at least. I wrote to them, trying to debunk what they were saying, and I never heard back from them.
Yeah, and it's very unfortunate that this, in my view, that this group has made itself millions of dollars, literally millions of dollars per year, spreading a false, phony, sexist message about domestic violence. So one of the reasons we started whiteribbon.org was to go what we call the real white ribbon. There's only one real white ribbon. That's the one that cares about violence toward everybody.
And that makes sense, because most normal people who don't have problems understanding know that the domestic violence has always been a generational issue. It affects both men, women, and children. And why A Voice for Men's White Ribbon Campaign actually is the honest campaign is because anybody who wants to donate there will see the agenda for A Voice for Men laid out very clearly. They want to denote to add money to A Voice for Men. They can do that. If they don't, there's an alternative website, and they can put their money there. There's no argument.
No. And the only thing that's bothering me, and the reason I wanted to bring up, is several sources in the press, including Cosmopolitan of all things. But
well, no, but why not Cosmopolitan?
Well, it's not like there's anything useful in Cosmo anyway, right? But we've seen it in some Australian SBS and Huffington Post and a few other places claiming that we're stealing money from a charity.
How can you steal money from a charity when your agenda is laid out for everybody to see?
Right. That would be the question now, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You go to that page and it says very clearly who's running it. Mm-hmm. And when it first started, for the first couple of days, we said voices, funding will go to A Voice for Men to help with website operations. Mm-hmm. And then in short order, when they started making noises, we decided to establish a legal fund. So now if you donate to whiteribbon.org, it'll go to pay lawyers to fend off these vultures. I'm sorry to be rude about it, but they're vultures who want to try to take whiteribbon.org away from us, because they only want to talk about men's violence towards women. And we will never support such a campaign or such a mission.
And actually, at the end of the day, Dean, most people know that's a way, way outdated concept. It really is.
Well, they should, or you'd think most people did.
They should.
But there's a horrible lot of misinformation out there that I think it works on instinct. I don't know if Laurie agrees with me, but I think men have this instinctive need to protect the female, whether that even makes any rational sense. Because I believe that's what the old White Ribbon so-called charity does.
But it's based on erroneous research material, and the research material that is internationally accepted is on the White Ribbon campaign that is run by A Voice for Men. The Voice for Men campaign is quite clearly It covers men, women, and children, everybody, as you say. And there's
That's
no
right.
reason for you not to use the White Ribbon campaign, because it belongs to everybody. All you're saying is, and this is what's behind it all, they do not want to share their pot of gold.
No, that's right.
So, and
I'll just add one other thing too. That the White Ribbon has been used by numerous political and social groups for going back more than 100 years. The first reference to it we could find was run by the Women's Christian Temperance Union to try to raise awareness of the evils, believe it or not, of the evils of men drinking alcohol and beating their wives. So I suppose there's a certain irony to that. But the Women's Christian Temperance Union was using it 100 years ago. And there have been several groups since then. Programs for veterans, dead veterans, the list goes on. So nobody owns a white ribbon.
No, exactly.
So anyway, if anybody has any other questions about that, the other thing that astounds me is only one person in the press has contacted us, and then she lied to her readers in Cosmo. Every other press so far has not even tried to contact us. Until today, we got a letter from the Daily Mail in London.
Oh, good old Daily Mail in London.
With them.
Oh, yeah, do, please, because I write for them sometimes, and they're very supportive of men.
Well, maybe I'll even have them give you a call.
Yeah, sure.
Anyway, so if anybody's curious about us, please check out whiteribbon.org. Laurie will tell you, Erin will tell you. You go look at that, and you will find a ton of real research. And I don't mean cherry-picked research either, real stuff. Every show, I think almost every show you and I have done together, Erin, with all these researchers, Mary Strauss,
and they're internationally
Marty Fieber,
respected.
Don Dutton, and Nicola Graham Creven, blah, 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 study after study after study. You can go and look. It's just the truth. And who are the biggest victims of domestic violence at all?
Children.
Wouldn't you agree, Laurie?
Oh, at 100%, because that's where it all begins.
Yeah.
With how children are treated.
Mm.
And that's always been one of my biggest gripes with feminist ideology is their ideology is completely out of line with child developmental science, trauma theory, everything we know about how trauma affects the human brain and children's holistic development is that children are traumatized in the limbic system, especially by violence, and that's what passes on a cycle of violence. And
so, Laurie, Laurie, this seems to me a good time for me to start with asking you, when did you first wake up? When did you first suddenly realize that things were not what you thought they were?
Regarding feminism?
Just your whole life. I mean, I was talking to in the last program.
Feminism, the standard party line on domestic violence.
Sure.
Or you as a person.
Well, I know. For me, I was never actually asleep because from the start, I've always thought outside the box. I never had preconceived notions, and everything that I was living and witnessing as a child never fit with any of these. These campaigns that I started to hear as early as maybe around 8 or 9 years old, where it all started with the whole stranger danger programs.
Did you come from a happy, contented family background?
Well, I don't want to get too into my own personal background.
That's fair enough.
Because I'm a professional. But what I will say is that I did have a very traumatic childhood. I came from a long, long line of matriarchs on one side of the family. One side of my family was very matriarchal.
And
I watched. I not only experienced a long line of many females, adult females abusing males in the family, and I even saw things as severe as adult man being thrown down an entire flight of steps by a woman half his size. I actually watched men being told to pick up food off the floor to eat it, and so I was witnessing that at home, and then in the neighborhoods and at my friends' homes, I was seeing a lot of violent mothers, witnessing my friends' moms being very violent towards, the children, especially towards teenage sons. And then at school, the amount of just sociopathy and hatred that I would witness from female school teachers towards children, especially towards boys, but towards children in general. It to this day, all of my work that pushes for homeschooling and unschooling and alternative education is all built around a foundation of what I witnessed in the school system, and then later professionally what I witnessed in working in and visiting countless schools, as well as being an educator myself at one point with younger kids. And so, I mean, the types of things that I would witness even as young as first grade, where I was witnessing school teachers that were verbally and physically abusive. Now, this was in the 1980s in New England, where corporal punishment was not legal. It is still legal in some parts of the United States, which is so abhorrent to me. But regardless of whether it's legal or not, don't let that fool you, because female and male school teachers abuse children on a daily basis anyway. But what I saw was females even doing very sexually violating things to children. They would go into the boys' bathrooms while boys were, out in the open urinating, and they would go in and grab them and pull them out of the bathroom if they think the child was doing something wrong, or some child had to go to the bathroom. They wouldn't let them go to the bathroom, so they ran out of the classroom. And I saw teachers take kids and slam them up against the walls in the hallway when they were acting out. I remember one teacher, I saw her take a boy with cerebral palsy who could not stand up on his own, couldn't hold himself in a sitting position for more than a few seconds. I remember her literally picking him up like he was a sleeping bag under her arm, drag him out into the hallway, slam him up against the wall, put his crutches under him, and drop him into the crutches, because he had the kind where he put his hands in them, and just start screaming at him. And I mean, I witnessed this sort of deviance, this sociopathic hatred, this violence towards children in such a
I've lost Laurie.
Yeah, it seems the connection is
pervasive.
bad.
It was chronic, pervasive, and it seemed to institutions, family. Okay. All right. I'm still here. I can hear everybody.
Oh, good, because we just lost quite a lot of what you said, which is such a shame because it's so articulate. But never mind. So just if I can encapsulate what you were saying, is you were in various schools in your role as an educator, and you saw things that absolutely horrified you.
Well, that wasn't exactly what I said. What was the last thing you heard me say? That'll help me get a sense of where
you were, because it was going in and out. I couldn't quite work out whether you're talking about a specific school or a lot of schools that you were working in.
Well, I wasn't actually talking about schools I was working in.
I was
talking about as a child.
As a child, in the schools that you were a child. Was this your own school then, when you were a child?
Yes, the schools that I attended, and I'm lumping a few of them in. What I'm trying to say is that as a child, I was witnessing across various institutions, whether it be family, school, media, out in public, my friends' families. I was just witnessing that women were incredibly violent, sexually, physically, and emotionally. And I had evidence of that. I could see it. But then later, when I started to get a little older and I was exposed to these campaigns where they would either talk about, protecting yourself against sexual assault, or when I was actually exposed to feminism as an ideology for the first time. The first time I heard it, I was about around 12, maybe on the cusp of 13. And I remember just being so shocked, because I was like, what are they talking about? The men in my life have all been safe places, I always had a lot of male friends, and I saw the way boys were treated in school, and so none of that ever fit for me. And so I remember a friend of mine, when I was about going to be turned. It was either just turned 13 or on the cusp of 13. A friend of mine mentioned something about feminism, and she was saying something in line with, well, my mother and I are feminists. And I said, feminists? I says, what does that mean? And I said, that sounds like you only like women. And she says, well, it means it's about women's rights. And I said, women's rights? I said, what about all people's rights? I said, what about kids' rights? And I remember she and I kind of got into it a little bit because she wasn't able to really articulate what it was because I don't think she knew either. But she just said, well, my mother says it's about women's rights. And I said to myself, and I said to her, what rights do we not have? What rights do women not have? All I know is as a kid, I can't do anything I want to do. So if we're going to fight for any rights, let's fight for kids' rights, I remember saying to her. And so that was my first exposure to the word feminism and feminism in general. And then as I got a little older into my adolescence, I remember just being appalled with this idea.
Oh dear, I've lost you again.
That
should we possibly try raising Laurie on the phone? I know it sounds a little choppy to do that, but perhaps we should try getting Laurie on the phone.
Yeah, I think so.
All these campaigns, I was...
Yeah, because we're missing everything she's saying.
Right. She seems not to be able to hear us as well.
All right, Laurie, we are going to call you on your telephone, and Erin and I will just sit here and chat for a minute. I will get past James your phone number because you're saying a lot of good stuff, and we're getting every third word. Wow. So here you go, James, on that phone number. So anyway, let's go ahead and drop Laurie off Skype. We'll give her a call. I'll tell you, I found Laurie very fascinating to talk to. I wanted to ask her, she's on the autism spectrum, and I actually wonder sometimes if that actually made it easier for her to see what other people are blind to.
Well, yes, because as she said, she thinks out of the box. She can think out of the box, and that's often when people can see very clearly.
Hello?
Because
Hello, Laurie.
Hi.
Hello. Oh, good. That sounds much better.
Yes, I that's disappointing because when I'm on a roll.
Well, this should work. And so you were on a roll, and you were talking about things that you saw as a kid, and you were talking about. I actually wonder. Well, this is part of your essay, I know, but I mean, I sometimes I'm so frustrated at some people's apparent inability to see girls or women as violent. I don't know what causes that because. I even reached a point in my own development where I couldn't see it. And yet when I look back, I go, wait a minute, I experienced and saw all kinds of things. And it's like I got some form of selective amnesia, but this isn't when I woke up. So I did have an awakening moment, but this isn't about mine. Maybe I'll do that show with Erin one day. So you were seeing stuff even as far back as when you were a child. Do you think I don't want to make this about autism, but I happen to have an autistic son. And I'm on the spectrum myself, believe it or not. So I actually wonder if your autism may be part of why you were able to see and process things other people couldn't.
Yeah, and I actually mentioned that absolutely because I have never seen things the way other people see them. I actually spend a lot of my life looking in and saying, what are people? Why do people just gather in masses and have this group think? I can't understand that. I see it out in public. You know, everybody has to rush to get the iPhone 6 or, do this or do that. And I find myself just really, almost fascinated by it. And I was as a little kid too, that people would just jump on these ideologies and jump on these bandwagons. And I couldn't figure it out because all I knew was I was very aware of my experiences. I saw what I saw. I knew what I saw, and nobody was going to tell me I didn't see it. And I also had an extremely strong sense as a young child that I am going to remember everything that I'm seeing, and I'm going to store it away, and I remembered it verbatim. I also had a photographic memory, so that did help. The other issue too is when I was 9 years old, after going through and witnessing hell and living through hell for so long, I finally made this little promise to myself, a pact, saying that if I get out of this alive, I make a promise to make sure no other child has to suffer what I have gone through and what I have seen other children suffer. And so that's when I made my first dedication to helping children and becoming a humanitarian and working for children's rights. And what I was saying before, and I'm not sure if it was cut off with the poor Skype connection, but across all of the institutions in my life, if you will, home, school, at home, at school, in the community, with friends, anywhere that I went, I was able to see that there were a great deal of violent women, especially at school, especially in my family, and like I said, with my own friends and their parents. And I also saw that there were an incredible amount of compassionate and safe boys and men, very vulnerable boys. And so when I started to see these campaigns, and when I started to hear people talk or posters put up at on the walls at schools and in the communities about sexual assault being, the stereotypical, male crime against females, I remember being very flabbergasted. It was almost like a crazy-making sensation. Like, what? What are people nuts? I mean, what? Why are they only looking at it from one side? I mean, what about male victims, or what about female perpetrators, or what about girls and boys being victims of women? I mean, it was like there was never any coverage of that, and I was so curious as I was getting older. And by the time I was a teenager, I was extremely just angry about it, because here I could actually see how I was treated, and I could see that I could get away with anything disciplinarily in school, and I could see the boys couldn't, and I could see I could weasel out of anything, even though I was doing some pretty crazy things. And I noticed that when my car broke down, it was always a man that stopped, and I would notice all of these things, the way my male friends were treated so poorly by the adults and spoken to with such contempt, and how I was always handled and treated as if I was a victim, rather than that, it was always sort of like, it's okay, just don't do it again. And I was handled differently than males. And so I saw this gross hypocrisy developing. And so then when I became old enough to start looking into a professional career, I was absolutely appalled when I saw what was truly out there. I remember my first experience really confronting feminism. I was only in my early 20s. I was not much older than my son is. And I went into this domestic violence, I think it was an agency. I don't know if they have shelters. I think they have shelters attached to them, because I wanted to work with children. And at the time, I wasn't sure how to break into a career with that. I had gone to art school. I was starting college back up again to focus from my art now onto psychology. And in the meantime, though, I wanted to work with kids and get my feet in the water and actually start doing some hands-on actual work and with kids. And so I thought, okay, well, what if I work at one of these domestic violence shelters and help some of the children there? So I called up and I scheduled an interview, and I went in, and I couldn't believe the experience. I mean, I'd never experienced anything like this before. 5 women sat around me in chairs. It was so intimidating. It was like they formed almost a circle around me. It was very, they were trying to intimidate me. It wasn't intimidating, because they don't realize that I don't get intimidated very easily because I'm an Aspie. I always see it as a curiosity, like, wow, what the hell are they up to here? This is crazy. Wow, this is more evidence that something's not right here. These people are covering something up. And I remember they asked me what I wanted for a position, and I said I want to work with abused children and I want to help them. And I said I'm going to be going to school studying to be, a counselor, and I want to get myself in the field. And so they all would look at each other and exchange glances, But they never really would answer my questions. And so finally, one of them said, okay, so what sorts of things would you want to do here? And I said, well, one of my specialties is I really, really understand boys who are victims of sexual abuse and domestic violence. I said, because I've done a lot of reading and research, and I've seen that there really isn't a lot out there for them. And then they exchanged the glances again, and then they all kind of looked at me, and one of them, the one who was kind of directing the interview, she looks at me and she goes, "Are you a feminist?" And I just was really taken aback, and I looked at her and I go, "Well, no." I says, "I'm a humanitarian." And she just looked at me like I had just said the most blasphemous, horrific thing on the planet. It was as if she made it, she reacted to me as if I had made some horrifically racist statement.
Well, you did exactly right. The other thing
in her mind, yes.
Yeah, but I wanted to say, hang on a minute. I wanted to say to you that I don't any ads in England for working in any of the refugees shelters here state specifically that you have to hold feminist views.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's the same in America. You will not. No one who doesn't actually hold those views can work in the shelter movement anywhere in the Western world.
And now this was back before I even knew what feminism was. I didn't, since I had not yet started my my studies in the psychology field, or I think I might have just started a class or something, but before I was in art school, so I hadn't really understood what the actual ideology was yet. So for me, it was like she's asking me, in my mind at the time, as this, very young person who, is also on the spectrum, so I see things in a very different way. I saw it as she's asking me, do I only care about women? And I was like, of course not. I want to help all people. Yeah. And so I said the thing that was the absolute blasphemy against their religion. And so then what they did was they scrambled, and within 30 seconds, they ended the interview. Yeah. And so what happened was I was kind of shocked by how abrupt they were, and they basically just gave me the line, "Well, don't call us, we'll call you." So before I left, I got another dose of reality, because I went and I used the restroom, and I'm in the restroom, and right in front of me on the door was a poster that said, "End violence against women and children." Yeah. And now this wasn't back in the days before cell phones, so I didn't have a camera with my, the only camera I had back then was a big SLR, so I couldn't take a picture, but I remember saying, damn it, I wish I had my camera, because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And I remember I went out to the desk and I said, "What about end violence against men and boys too?" And she just kind of looked at me like really shocked, and I said, "Well, okay, so you're going to call me?" And she says, "Yeah, don't bother calling us, we'll call you." And I remember immediately walking out of there and saying, well, obviously they're never going to call me back. Yeah. And that was my first true introduction into, what this feminism was all about. And then once I got into college and actually, started, getting trained by feminists and trained in feminist ideology, then it was, blasted open. It was very clear. And then at that point, though...
Can I ask you something? Did you suffer in college, like so many students have suffered, that they actually had to pervert their own beliefs in order to get the degrees that they wanted? I have so many contacting me saying, I can't say what I believe because if I don't lie, I will not get my degree.
Basically, that's what happened, only I was not somebody who ever conformed. So what I kind of did was I would just keep getting into debates with the teachers, and I would really speak up. And luckily, because I was a really excellent student, I was able to maintain the grades and do what they wanted me to do. But the problem was I had one particular teacher that deliberately gave me a B to destroy my 4.0 average because I would not on the exam say that that she used the word spanking. I don't use that word because it candy coats violence. But on the exam, they had put, she wanted students to write that spanking children was not abuse, and I absolutely refused to write that. I said all forms of violence are abusive, and I said, and hitting a child in any way, shape, or form is traumatizing to children. So she completely marked down my entire final grade for the entire class based on that and a few other. The other thing that I did that pissed her off is I did a presentation on male victims of sexual violence, and I played a song, "Daddy" by Korn, and in that song, the vocalist starts screaming and crying and singing the lyrics as if he's being raped, and I played that. And I said, to impress upon the student body that we need to stop ignoring sexual violence against males or sexual violence committed by women against anybody. And so she was pretty pissed off about that. So there were many, many times where I would not kind of give in. I did not take a so-called women's study course because I refused to. I would not do it because I read about it and I knew what it was about, and I would not do it because I knew I would have been I would have either been thrown out or I would have gotten an F. And so, but the thing is, Erin, is that every single textbook, every single piece of literature was all feminist biased, and it was every single piece of literature was all about women are victims. Women are the ones that suffer sexual violence. We need to protect women. Men are the primary perpetrators. And there was almost no provision given to anything else. And if they did mention male victims, they always, would give these minuscule amounts. Yeah. And interestingly, one of the things that is irrefutable is that men and boys are the primary victims of suicide. Well, the way they were able to handle that in the textbooks is they would just ignore that and say, well, women attempt more. That's ridiculous, because if more people, if more men are committing suicide, don't you think more men are attempting it? How do you know who's attempting it? Anybody could be attempting it in their house right now. You're not going to know that. And so that was their way of kind of handling that. And so the textbooks were, I wish I had saved them all, but I've had some moves over the years, and a lot of them are outdated.
Actually, you must, Laurie, as far as the textbooks are concerned, they're all still circulating. I mean, across the Western Universe, they're still all there. I mean, social worker textbooks, basically, the whole concept. But the thing that interests me is that, so this is you when you were much, much younger. Now, because we've only got half an hour left and your talk is fascinating, can I move you forward to what was the next step where you yourself began to make the changes that would, in a sense, separate you from the evil empire and begin to do the work that you did, because some of it's absolutely fascinating.
Sure. I actually was trying to do that work back before I even went to college. I couldn't figure out how to do it, though.
Yeah, I can see that.
So my first step was to just try to get in and start actually working with children. So I started out by the first job I was able to get with children was working as a toddler teacher, then a preschool teacher. I started out as an assistant and then I actually was the head teacher. So I did that for a while. So then I worked with the little ones. And I had to confront a lot of, just abuse in that setting. There wasn't a lot of feminism per se in that sort of field, but definitely an ignorance against sexual abuse of males. Just all across the board, total ignorance. My second, when I got into grad school was where things really picked up, because when I started grad school, at that point I started working as a social worker before I got my mental health counseling degree. And I worked in this, I did my job and my internship in this program that worked with severely troubled adolescents. And we worked with kids that were, we did work with some little ones too, but most of the kiddos were between the ages of 16 and 22 that we worked with. And these were children that didn't have families. They were in the foster care system. They had suffered some of the most horrific abuses that I've ever heard. A lot of them had been in the foster care system for years. A lot of them had been violent. Some of these kids had raped people, slit people's throats, attempted murder. So these kids had seen and suffered quite a bit. and you could really see how the cycles were continuing. And my job was to find, in my actual paid work, the job was to try to find temporary foster homes for these children as a last-ditch effort, and to train these specialized foster or therapeutic foster parents. And then I also did an internship where I was providing therapy to some of these children as well. And I loved it because these kids they just were dying to be loved and to be cared for, the boys and the girls alike. But it was very clear that the boys were treated with harshness and seen as behavioral problems, where the girls were treated as victims and seen more that they need treatment. So there was definitely a response, it was very clear, the bias. I also at that time started to do a lot of writing and tried to communicate and start getting my writing out there about what I was seeing, but everywhere I just kept getting stonewalled. So I just focused on research, documenting. And then when social media happened...
You know Murray Strauss, don't you?
I do, and I met with him a few times in the 90s during that time, just to speak with a like-minded individual, because my research ended up bringing me to him, and he was one of the few people that I could speak to at the time about it. And I said that it's crazy making.
Professor Murray Strauss, in case anybody listening doesn't know, one of the very foremost experts on researchers on domestic violence. And we had an interview. If you look at at our show archives, you'll see the interview Erin and I did with Professor Strauss. Erin's old friends with him. Yeah. Anyway.
Absolutely. He's great. And so I knew that I needed to write a book. So that was my biggest thing at the time, is I knew I needed to write a book. And there were a few different life circumstances at the time. I was suffering at the time from, life-threatening Crohn's disease, which at the time was very unstable. I was helping to raise my oldest nephew, and I also knew that, I wanted to adopt a child, which when my health became stable in 2004, I did start the process of adopting my son. So during that time, I was really writing prolifically and really trying to talk to researchers, collect information. At that point, I was a licensed mental health counselor. I was working with children and youth. And what I found is that all of our training materials, not just when I was in grad school, but I mean all of the things that we have to do, all of our in-service trainings throughout the year, everything is 100% through a feminist lens. And there is, it is all biased. Domestic violence is a crime against women by men, and sexual assault is a crime by men against mostly women. And, there's a few exceptions, however. And that's how we're trained. That's how we're indoctrinated in the field. And whenever I have tried to get services and help for my male victim clients or male victim clients' parents, male clients, male parents or family members of my clients, there is really very little out there. And I can't tell you how many times over the years that I have had problems being able to get proper services for these kids or for their fathers.
Now, you're 40 years old now, right? So you've been waging this fight professionally for 15 years, perhaps? Something like
over that. Yeah, a little over that.
Professionally. But you had mentioned to me something in a private conversation I wanted to ask you about, because some statistics you look at, now there's all kinds of problems with a lot of the statistics, but one of the problems I've noted with at least statistics on sexual assault, sexual abuse, is it's very hard to get a man to even say he was sexually assaulted or abused. And you were telling me that you have ways of asking men the question that gets a more honest answer. Can you tell us a little
really interesting. That? Oh, please tell us. That would
it's absolutely. When just to give you an overview of what I do, I'm a licensed mental health counselor in my paid job. I also do consulting on the side and speaking, but as far as this private counseling that I'm doing as I'm building my consulting business, what I've done for the last 14 years is I treat children for trauma. And so it is very difficult, though, to get an accurate assessment of trauma in boys or in their fathers, because the questions that you're supposed to ask are the very questions are biased against males. For example, if you say to a teenage boy, were you sexually abused, or have you been sexually abused, they're almost always going to say no. Because first of all, they may not even be aware that they have been, because it's not defined. It hasn't been defined for them. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've had boys of all ages, from really little boys to boys that are, 18 years old, telling me that, well, I thought that only happens to girls. Well, I thought that couldn't happen to boys. Or I thought that if a woman did that, it's not, but then so what I do is I don't use any sort of loaded language. For example, if I'm interviewing parents, and what I will do is I will talk separately to the man and the woman, and I might say, so tell me a little bit about your relationship issues. Is there any, and then I get into that. And if it looks like there's a contentious or has been a contentious situation, I'll say, has there ever been any pushing or shoving or any, anybody throwing anything or anybody hitting or anybody yelling or saying anything? And I'm telling you, more often than not, that's when you'll get the male to say, well, yeah, she's slapping me all the time, or, oh, yeah, she does that all the time to me. But if I were to say, and I've done this as a little experiment, are you a victim of domestic violence to the man? Well, he's going to say, oh, no, there's no domestic violence. I would never hit her. But if you ask a woman, is there domestic violence, she will be the first to tell you, oh, yes, absolutely. But then when you kind of talk to her a little bit, okay, so tell me a little bit of how that goes. Like, who's doing the hitting? Has there ever been any mutual? Like, have you ever hit anybody or thrown anything? Well, yeah, I hit him first, but, and so when you do a really thorough interview, not using loaded language like domestic violence or sexual assault or rape or abuse, if you just talk in generalized terms of, is there any of this, or, have you ever had a sexual experience, or you will find out so much more. And it's amazing how many men and boys are suffering these abuses, and none of them, even though these kids and these families have been in the system before, none of them have ever in their record had it documented.
Yeah, Laurie, I wanted to tell you, there's a very interesting moment. I was talking to a woman because her little girl had been sexually assaulted by the father and various neighbors of his. And I was talking to her, and I said, but when you were a child, you suffered from the same thing. And I said, and you had all this therapy. Why didn't you ever tell anybody? And she said, because nobody asked the right question.
Yes.
So that is such an important part of it, isn't it?
Another thing that I see a lot, this is something that I saw a lot when I used to work at the previous job, when I was doing the social work, when you have a case slapped, on your desk of a child that's been in the system. When it's a girl, you can almost guarantee that on the front page it's going to say, front and center, sexual abuse victim, if she was a sexual abuse victim. But if it's a boy, and the boy is a sexual abuse victim, if it's documented at all, which it usually isn't, you will have to go through many, many pages to maybe find some reference that he had a relationship with such and such. And so, or sexually abused at age 6 by an aunt. But it'll be one little tiny sentence buried in tons of data. And that was one of the things I'd see all the time, is that, in fact, there was a huge media situation one time, and it was interesting because all the girls in one particular situation were diagnosed with PTSD and the boys were not. And so it's interesting how when it comes to females in the system, when girls are acting out, when girls are violent, it's always seen as she's a trauma victim. She needs treatment. She needs hospitalization. Do a CBAT for her, which is like a temporary hospitalization. But if it's a boy, it's get the police involved, put him on medication, drug him.
So Erin's got Erin, your story is probably, I'm imagining, with the girl who nobody ever asked the right question. This was probably for you 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Now, fast forward to today, and it appears, correct me if I'm wrong, they usually get asked the right questions, the girls do, but what I'm hearing is that the boys don't. Now, what I would ask either of you is, but especially Laurie, since she's currently doing it, and this is an adult show, you can be blunt. What do you ask? Well, let's say I'm 15 years old, or for that matter, 45 years old. I don't know if you see adults at that age, but
I don't work with adults.
All right. I'm 15.
Yeah.
I'm 15. All right. I'm 15 years old, and you suspect maybe I was sexually molested. What are you asking me to get to that?
Well, I mean, I don't have a specific party line. Every single child is different. Some kids, I may ask it a different way because each child presents very differently. Some kids, if there is a child who's very, very shy and seems very timid, I'm not going to ask that question at all for a little while until I build some rapport. But if there's somebody who seems very open, I'll say, tell me a little bit about some of the sexual experiences you've had. Or I might open it up with, are you sexually active, is what I'll first say. And if they say yes, then I'll start asking questions. Okay, how old were you when you first had a sexual experience? And often that's when you'll uncover sexual abuse. Sometimes, you'll
hear something like 8.
Exactly. And
like
some,
8.
yeah, or maybe not 8. I remember, one particular situation where a 19-year-old boy was saying to me, well, I am in a sexual relationship right now. Okay, well, with whom and what age is the person? Oh, well, she's 25. And I'm thinking, okay, so there's your red flag right there. Okay, so how is that going? And then you get a sense that, what's happening, how is he reacting, then you start seeing that he's panicking, he's starting to get shaky. And then eventually, you start drawing out a little bit more information, you find out that he's getting raped by this woman. And that happens more than you realize. But see, most counselors do not take that time to do that with kids. Now, there's times where it's not appropriate to ask about sexual sexual abuse at all because the child seems so shut down that you really need to build a rapport and see if they give you clues. You never want to lead a kid and say, were you sexually abused? But people do that all the time. I might ask the parent that question bluntly.
Let me go ahead and add the appropriate disclaimer. I'm asking Laurie A. Couture here about generalizations, and I hope counselors are listening. Nobody try this stuff at home, please. If you don't know what you're doing, I'm just asking for broad.
But
things.
Dean, it's quite a good general question to ask. I often ask, and let's say this is a 15-year-old boy, because I'm thinking about this. I just started off by saying, "Tell me how because he's mom and two boys. Tell me how your family operates." And then we go through the rooms and what they've got and which rooms, and then we find out there's only 2 bedrooms. So he says very, very honestly, and he's not threatened by, well, of course, my older brother have his own room, and I sleep with my mom. And there's the flag.
Well, it may be a flag, Erin. I come from a different viewpoint on that because I'm an attachment parenting proponent, and, co-sleeping is a very natural thing. It's maybe not natural in Western civilization, but it is the way humans are meant to be, but naturally kids will on their own want to leave the family bed at some point, and they should be allowed to do it. I think that, equating co-sleeping with sexual abuse is
I promise you in that case it wasn't co-sleeping, it was sexual abuse.
Yeah, and it can be, but I mean, what I find with the co-sleeping is that most parents don't want to admit they're co-sleeping because their kids want to co-sleep, and Americans are, most counselors are telling them that it's bad to sleep with your kids, that it's a terrible thing, and that's actually what I find more is that children want to have that comfort at night, and the parents are pushing them away is what I find is the biggest problem. I have not encountered any issues where children were sleeping with their parents and there was anything inappropriate. Usually what I find is sexual abuse happens in homes where there is no attachment parenting, where there is violence, when attachment parenting isn't even on anybody's radar screen. Is what
I suppose what I look at is, it's an absolute fact, and nobody can argue with this, that the majority of serial killers were sexually molested by their mothers.
Absolutely.
And particularly in one case that I know a lot about, he went on to strangle 18 young men. It turned out in the end that, yes, he was in bed with his mother. He did have sex with his mother, and she took a lover and moved the lover into the bed. I think this is, and, because nobody suspected, and this is quite a while ago, that there's a total, the taboo is women don't do it.
That's right. So it's not about the bed. It's not about where people are sexually abusing children. It's the fact that these people are sexual abuse victims themselves. They haven't gotten the treatment, and they are passing on this horrific, violent cycle onto their children. They're using their children as their sex toys.
It all comes to a certain sort of common sense. I have a 9-year-old son. He's almost 10. Last night, I was laying on the couch, and he came and he jumped on me, and he wrestled me, and he doesn't have a shirt on, and neither did I, and we're hugging, and we're kissing, and we're tickling each other, and there's nothing unnatural about that. In fact, given that he's autistic, I feel particularly blessed that he allows that level of contact.
Yes.
But it's still, I guess it would go back to the point of looking for flags. A flag is just a flag. Co-sleeping isn't normal in this society, so you look at it. Of course, if you find out there's nothing going on there, kid just is still sleeping in the same bed with his mom and dad, okay, well, fine. And then, on the other hand, is there touching in private parts? Is there a little more?
That's what's most important, is finding out what are the boundaries. Like, when I have a mother say to me that, that I grab my son and wrestle him to the ground and he's screaming and saying, "Stop it." Well, then that's a really big red flag. Like, that's not how you express affection. Affection should be expressed mutually, and if your child is a little standoffish, which a lot of American kids are, then they need affection, and you have to gradually, increase that affection until they are able to be more cuddly with you, because that is so critical. And I think children are far more vulnerable at all ages to sexual abuse when they are not getting their needs met for touch and skin stimulation. They're far more vulnerable to sexual abuse because they're looking for any sort of skin stimulation, any type of connection, any type of affection, even if it's, abusive and makes them feel terrible inside. So I think that's the biggest.
You might even think that whether it's physical violence or sexual abuse, it may even be I don't know, either one of you ladies can give me your opinion. I'm just curious. Either one of those, sexual or non-sexual abuse, may be like the brain is miswired and is looking for the contact, and this is the only way they know how.
Oh, yes.
To be violent or be sexual or be whatever. It's the only way they know how. They don't know any other way.
Children in residential facilities, the teenagers that used to live in the residentials, which are, otherwise known as group homes, used to tell me that they used to purposely provoke restraints so that they could get touched and hugged, because they were so desperate and so starved for love, affection, and hugs, that they would provoke those violent restraints by these, caretakers that would take these kids down and restrain them. Sometimes 3 adults doing it, men, women, didn't matter. And the kids would provoke it just so they could get some affection.
That breaks my heart to hear that. It really does.
It really breaks mine as well. And I'm finding that, and you and I talked about this briefly, Dean, is that I find that all kids are suffering, boys and girls. And I would not ever say that there's any sort of pissing contest on who's suffering more. However, one of the things that I have noticed is that because boys do not have, there are not equal services for boys. There is not equal understanding. There is not equal empathy and compassion. And there is not even, an inkling of what they go through, that I do think that boys are suffering more in our culture because of that, and also all the negativity they're getting from the culture at large in schools, in the media, the shaming of boys everywhere. They're being shamed.
In the men's rights movement, what we call it is the empathy gap. The empathy gap.
I think that's absolutely right.
There's instant empathy for girls, sometimes even occasionally when they don't particularly need it. And not always. Many girls do need empathy, but there's almost none for boys. And it pervades the culture. And I don't know if it was always that. I mean, I don't know if it was always bad.
It certainly wasn't, Dean. It wasn't always there. I mean, and the frightening thing is the change since the 60s across all the Western world, because the attitudes originally towards children were equal. The subject, obviously, of domestic violence wasn't even around. No one ever discussed it. But the actually demonizing of boys is something that came along with the early origins of the women's movement.
Which you were there to witness.
I was there, both in America and here. And the very first thing that the architects of this evil empire said is that we have to make our boys more like girls. And from then onwards, that's exactly what's been happening. Boys are only acceptable in their role as feminized, like their sisters.
That's absolutely true. I've seen that more and more. And also my son had a unique perspective because I'm going to allow him to, on his own time, tell his own story. But one thing that he has given me permission to state is my son had been, suffered quite a tremendous amount of abuse when he was in both the biological home and the foster care system. He was in 10 different placements total. And he came into my life when he was 11 years old. And when he first came into my life, his self-concept as a male, as a boy, was completely shattered. And he told me, now keep in mind, he didn't just go to one school or live in one family, like one home. He was in multiple families. He was in 2 group home or residential facilities, and he also went to multiple schools in multiple different areas. And so he had perspectives of testing this out everywhere. And one of the things that he said was across the board was this pervasive sense of boys are bad, girls are good. Boys can't be beautiful, only girls can be beautiful. And that even no matter how good you are, if you're a boy, you can never be as good as a girl. And that if you stand up for girls and you align yourself with girls, then you'll be able to get on the good side of the teacher or the good side of the adult. And most of the people that were in his life through all of this were all female. So he had a sense, one of the things that's very common that he went through, that a lot of the children that I've worked with, I have a specialty in kids who have been adopted and through the foster care system and had severe trauma. So I've worked with many families who have adoptive children, and many children that are still in the foster care system were still waiting for families. And one of the things I see across the board is this idea that when children sexually act out, or when they're just, taking a bath, or just anything to do with their bodies is considered inappropriate, because they have to naturally establish boundaries in these new homes, because a lot of these kids do sexually act out. However, these kids end up developing a very, very strong sense of shame, because the system and the foster parents are trained to just come down so hard on them for the littlest infractions with their sexual acting out, so that even something like what my son experienced is that he says even, something as simple as just taking a bath, he said when he was only 6 years old, he was left alone in the tub for periods of time so that he could wash himself, because it was inappropriate. And so that's kind of scary to me, to think little kids that age are being left alone unattended because they're, and then getting a sense of, well, there's something wrong with your body. And that's something that I've heard across the board. Now, I've worked with a lot of kids who sexually act out, like I said, and those kids, it's even worse because any little acting out they do, they're just getting it reinforced that your body is bad, it's inappropriate, because they're not understanding that the action that I'm doing is making people uncomfortable. They're just hearing, my body's bad, sexuality's bad, I'm bad. And that's what they're hearing. And that happens, I would say more to boys than to girls.
I think that's right.
It's about almost the flip of what you hear about girls 50, 60, 70 years ago taught to be ashamed of their sexuality. It seems like it's almost on a complete 180. And now we're shaming little boys for their sexuality starting at a very early age, because you're not the first one I've heard that story from either, Laurie. But we've been going about an hour now, and we probably want to start wrapping the show up. Laurie A. Couture has the honor of, I guess, saying when we asked the question, when did you wake up? The answer appears to have been when she was born.
Yeah, I was never asleep.
Which is quite impressive. Do you want to ask anything else, Erin?
No, I'm just in awe of you, Laurie. I think you're a wonderful person. And I'm very pleased to be able to talk to you, and keep on with the good work.
And Laurie A. Couture, did you have anything else you wanted to mention to people before we close up today?
I think that being able to have a variety of people in our lives, a diversity of people in our lives, helps us to stay compassionate. My best friend since I was 11 years old is a man. And so, he and I grew up together from 11. We're both 40. And to be able to, as man and woman, and in the past as boy and girl, to be able to sort of toss those life experiences off of each other and realize, wow, we're going through the same things. We have the same feelings about things. And wow, we have more similarities than differences. And then where there are differences, we were able to really develop compassion for each other. And, I remember, even something about male genital mutilation, being able to try to imagine, geez, why did they do that to my friend and not to me? And I can't imagine why anybody would do that. And so I think that the key is that we have to stop separating the sexes, and I feel that that's what feminism is trying to do. It's trying to drive a rift between family members, between children and parents, between men and women, and make it so that we can't have that compassion for one another, that sort of tossing life experiences off each other. We realize we're all suffering together. And if we just wake up and...
Laurie, we need to get you on national television. We'll have to work on that. I'll tell you what, I will make a plug for everybody. Please read Erin Pizzey's book, This Way to the Revolution, where she documents all that. We've been doing this show for a year and a half, Erin, and I have yet to mention your bloody book. What's wrong with me? But the history is there. All you have to do. You knew Gloria Steinem, for goodness sakes. You knew Betty Friedan. You knew where all this stuff starts. And then I have people come to me.
Susan Miller, who wrote the books on rape.
Oh, God, the horrid books on rape. Wrong books on rape. Very wrong. But anyway, Laurie A. Couture, you've been a genuine pleasure to have on as a guest. Want to let everybody know next week we'll be back with Tales from the Infrared, our show Red Geek Culture from a Red Pill perspective. Obviously, we'll be talking about the termination of the last, the season ending of Doctor Who, more Walking Dead, and of course, there's no way we will be able to avoid talking about Gamergate. So, we'll see you all next week, and Erin and I will be back next week, or in 2 weeks at this regular time. I believe our guest will be from Iran, but we shall see. I
do hope so.
James, please take us home. You have been listening to When Did You Wake Up with Erin Pizzey. We would like to thank James Huff, Paul Elam, and the A Voice for Men community for their support of this show. If you like what you hear and would like to continue to hear more, donations can be made on the front page of A Voice for Men. That's www.avoiceformen.com. Our theme music is Space 1990B by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. That's INCOMPETECH.com. And is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution License 3.0 and will be noted in the show notes on YouTube. Thank you for listening.